My name is Anthony Galloway Jr. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so forth and so on. Let's go. I know folks have been waiting. I don't want to dilly-dally too much. So, um, wanted to first give a little personal testimony as it relates to uh, schoolishness and unlearning that or acknowledging it, realizing it. And I'm going to talk a bit about myself for a second, and then we'll proceed from there. All right, so this is acknowledging how schoolishness has popped up and is popping up or occurring for me. January 24th, I confirmed with the Alliance folks that I'd be willing to participate and confirmed what the subject matter and even the sort of subtitle would be. Basically, a whole month goes by, it's February 28th, and I realize, oh, this event is coming up, and I've like not really set aside time to prepare for this. I've thought about it a little bit or considered things, but haven't done anything. March 2nd, Bria sends out an email with some logistical information. I realize I still haven't done anything. So I set aside time in my calendar with some reminders. Saturday evening, I need to make sure that I set aside time to put this together. And then Saturday evening came, but the events of the day caused me to like not to do that. The reminders came in, but I was too tired on a phone call, severe headache. I just didn't do it. So this morning at 9 a.m., by 9 a.m., I was actually able to get up and be coherent and think and put something together and started to work on the outline for this very presentation. 9:30, 9:50, or whatever period of time, I get a little bit distracted or a lot of it distracted looking up and reading about something totally unrelated. 10 o'clock, I recommit, get connected again to what I'm supposed to be doing. 10:10, I realized that like, oh, this is my same old habit or behavior. Like for me, this is my schoolishness manifesting. I habitually procrastinated homework assignments, school assignments to the last moment and pulled something, amazing out and did something, I was a grade A student and had high GPAs all throughout high school and college. And so there was something that I was relying on to just get the grade and just be able to pass or get the task done, while simultaneously realizing sometime later in college that I wasn't learning very much. I was just doing what was necessary to get the grade, just checking off the boxes, but not actually learning, not engaging with the content in any real or meaningful way, not preparing. And so I was not really a great student in the traditional sense. Time goes by and I realized also that like, oh, I need to tell or start off with this particular story. And I think that would be a great place to start because the idea of schoolishness and or deschooling and getting into SDE, even though I'm a huge advocate for it, a facilitator, started a school, you'd never arrive. Like it's never, especially if you've grown up in a more traditional or conventional school setting, it's not something that you're really going to get over, but it is a skill set that you can develop in recognizing it, acknowledging it, and pivoting away from those types of behaviors. Additionally, I think when we're talking about bringing schoolishness in and how we facilitate or work with kids or as educators or doing anything in that school sort of setting, to me that those things are quite easy to address or to deal with because there's some simple questions that you can ask yourself and like some key indicators that kind of pop up, especially when the dynamic is you as an adult working with a young person. But the stuff that's internal and the ways in which we do it for ourselves and how we struggle, that's where it all comes from. So if we can stop imposing schoolishness on ourselves or acknowledge and recognize when it comes up for us, then it's that much easier to break free from it and acknowledge it when we're imposing it on young people. And so that's sort of the revelation or thought that I had, just 20 or 30 minutes ago. And also acknowledging like that could be some BS, that could be just some last minute nonsense throwing something together. But I kind of stand on it in this moment and also then decided to like really throw away the way I might traditionally and have traditionally gone about these types of talks, having all my talking points together and having a really nice or cute PowerPoint together and all the bullet points and breaking the session down into all these things where I am the teacher and I have this thing to give you all, information to give you all, and all these organized resources to present, and everybody takes their notes, asks great questions, and feels really fed by it. And that is beneficial, that's useful, that's how conferences and classes and courses happen. But also, does it have to happen that way all the time? Or do I need to be so loyal or committed to this particular method or way of disseminating information and talking about my experiences? Over the past year, when I've done interviews or talked to people or even written about SDE and unschooling and schoolishness, I've noticed that in the moments where I'm just responding to people's particular questions or concerns about the subject, I find that that's easier for me to help out in that sense, rather than putting together a package of information to share and come off as any kind of sage on the stage or anything of that sort. So I am simultaneously operating in my traditional schoolish mindset and habits while also realizing it in this moment and trying to like strongly break free from those patterns. So wanted to completely be forthcoming and honest and put that out there so that I can hold myself accountable to, you know, transparency, honesty, and also be an example or provide, provide some modeling of admitting when we're doing it and struggling with breaking out of those patterns or those habits. So that's the, you know, real or transparent testimony that I wanted to give in this moment. Now, some other stories, more traditional things that I can share with you about how schoolishness has popped up in the past, and obviously having facilitated these spaces for 6-7 years, I have plenty of stories that I could tell or bring up. Some of the ones that really stood out or popped out for me was when, so operating a school that's in a small city of Clarkson and being near a library and just people seeing us, people sometimes want to drop off books and everybody wants to donate books to a school, or they have some old encyclopedia set. Well, I grew up and actually had a like this Britannica encyclopedia set, A through Z, for a specific year. We didn't like always update it or get new editions or anything, but I remember how just great it was to have that. Obviously, this is before internet was, you know, broadband and cheaper and fully accessible and Wikipedia and anything like that. But I really enjoyed having that, and I enjoyed the aesthetic or the feeling of a library or a shelf of books or just going to the library. And so when this old encyclopedia set was donated to the school, I just thought it was, you know, the most amazing thing to have. And there were some dictionaries and thesaurus that they included. And I was like, oh, this is great. They can peruse this, be able to look things up, and we'll have this shelf and it'll have this aesthetic. And the school building that we were at was very small, and certainly didn't have room for a bunch of old dusty encyclopedias. And also having those books to take up that much space when most of the kids had access to a phone or a tablet and could very easily search up something, you know, on Wikipedia, just on Google at the time, didn't make sense. It was like, it was so silly for me to be fixated on the nostalgia of having that. And I, you know, really fought and tried, was like, yeah, let's keep this, let's have this, let's set it up. But without finding adequate space, it just became a nuisance. And I realized that how silly I was being, you know, after a few weeks. And sometimes our nostalgia or attachment to our traditional school experiences or things about our school experiences that we've really enjoyed or really liked can bring out that schoolishness and cause us to cling to things that are no longer serving us and actually aren't even serving the young people that we're working with, much less the young people of the future. So that's one example. Another one is sometimes when leading activities, learning programs, field trips, I don't always completely outline and tell them, or didn't tell them sometimes, what to expect or break down how to digest this information, and just like, hey, just approach this where you're doing this, just be open-minded, pay attention, and let's see what you get out of it. And knowing that, like, even from my own experience, sometimes engaging with things, not knowing how to categorize it or knowing what information how to organize the information or prioritize it was a huge hindrance to me actually learning and engaging with it, because everything seemed important. And then my brain's working overtime trying to remember all the details, or in order to not knowing which trivia to maintain for some possible pop-up quiz. And I realized, like, this is a very toxic pattern that I'm getting in, where they signed up to be a part of an offering, or to watch this documentary, or go on this field trip, or we're just doing this thing. And rather than being more forthcoming or transparent about all the little steps of it, or what it's going to be about, or what they can expect, I'm trying to create this experience of, like, yeah, just go for the ride and just, chill out and relax and trust me. And realizing, like, well, no, that's not fair, because that's not a parameter or that's not an expectation or way in which I would gauge in any information or educational experience now today. And I certainly didn't like it as a young person, but I fell back into this habit of trying to encourage them to be, just curious academic students who are always open and ready to learn about any and everything without context ahead of time. And so that was a repeat mistake that I was making. And that's an example of some schoolishness popping out for me, particularly in working with young people. Another one is, because of being our SDE space and just the way in which the learning and activities manifested for us, there wasn't a lot of academic writing or extended long form writing, or even reading for that matter. And while I don't have the belief that college is for every student, or that they should go, or that, like, anybody should take out these massive loans not knowing, I did align myself with, let's keep university and college somewhat open and or available. Let's leave it as a possibility. But seeing that we had some teens and approaching, high schoolers who did not have those writing skills down, and, reasonably would be very far behind their peers from their conventional public schools, or even if they were to go into college, would be very behind in their writing skills, or might not even be able to do the application essays, and feeling very nervous and uptight about that, and finding ways I started to build the program or build graduation processes that would embed and require them to work on those skills or get better at that, not so that they could get into college or they would be super great or well in college, but just so that it could be an option, and keeping that, pathway open. And I had nervousness about it, and I realized that I still have nervousness about it today and now, but I realized, like, that's coming from my own school and academic experience, where it was just something that I was told was very important and was a skill set that I used and sort of coasted on in college, being able to write really well and understanding how to formulate an essay. But, times are changing. I mean, how much it pains me to say this, but how much long form writing and reading is going to be happening, in the future when they are adults. How important is handwriting going to be? So many of them had bad handwriting, but that's because there was just nothing in their lives that really required them to handwrite anything. Most of the stuff that we do now is typing. So I had some hiccups about that, and not sure how to bring that about or encourage it. And one way I dealt with that was to actually tell them or explain to them, like, hey, I'm having these sort of hangups and confusions about this, especially with the teenagers who could hear it and understand it and process it and give their own reflections and thoughts about it. And so I really, really kind of needed to step back from that and allow them, once communicating to them that I'm having those concerns, allow them to take that and do with it what they will, but also not take on that stress, but let them know that it might be something to consider. Last personal story or sort of on-brand testimony about the subject that I'll share for this period of time is, having students who, and this isn't about me, this is how it, comes up in them at times, because even though that they're in an SDE space, they still have friends from church or friends from just, cousins or next door neighbors or friends from Boy Scouts who are in conventional school settings. And so they reach a certain age and they know their multiplication facts and times tables, or they can riff off or talk about certain historical facts or features, not in any sort of detailed way, but they have a context for it. And my students would feel insecure, self-conscious about the fact that they hadn't gotten their timetables down yet, or that they didn't know some of these basic sort of historical narratives and be able to reference or at least understand references to them. And that led them to then pursue learning those things. And, there was nothing wrong with it necessarily. They had their own internal or intrinsic motivation to do it. No one was making them do it, but it also maybe wasn't coming from the healthiest place or the most positively motivating force, right? Because they're now playing comparison and they're feeling left behind or feeling insecure because of their peers who are able to do these things. I had one student who, when trying to get into studying math and learn his timetables, there was a way in which he conceived learning it or understanding it that he thought it was just kind of an automatic thing or that you just get. And because he wasn't getting it quickly or fast, or that he didn't already have the foundations for it, he had a huge breakdown about it, because now not only is he, behind, air quotes, behind his peers, but now he doesn't know how to catch up or is having trouble with catching up. And that largely also was facilitated by just the not understanding how the learning process works. Like, there's sometimes you do engage with or work on things that take some effort, and it's not just like an easy thing that comes to you. And there were some issues there, but it ended up actually turning around, because one weekend it comes about that he's at his stepbrother's house or stepfamily's house, and he doesn't know them or is trying to learn them, and his stepbrother either teaches it to him or shows him some app, and in the course, I didn't believe it initially, but over the course of the weekend, he had learned his timetables and multiplication facts quite actually in a weekend, which to me was mind-boggling because I'm just so bad at mental math. But the idea that he was able to get motivated with a peer who took some time to explain it to him or show it to him in his own comfort zone, and be exposed to how to learn it, how to do it, and then an app where he could get proficient at memorizing or learning it. It's like, this guy just learned multiplication and then also can do the mental math quite easily in over the course of a literal weekend between Friday and Monday was bizarre to me, but it happened. And that's another example of how for them, the imposition of schoolishness can come from so many different angles, even if they're in an SDE space. So that's why I included it in sort of my presentation title or subtitle about, not just us as educators or just us as parents and how we bring it into their lives, but how they get it from the material that they engage in, the movies or the shows that they watch, the conversations with peers and friends, the expectations. And so knowing that you have to do a lot more to combat it than just make sure that you're not doing it or you're not imposing it, because you also have to protect them or give them the skill set to deal with it outside of your presence and with other folks, peers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, karate coaches, etc. So those are some personal testimony stories that I wanted to share about how I deal with, face up to a lot of these schoolishness things that kind of pop up. There's so many more and a lot of different angles it pops up in for the perspective of a parent with their own child that is kind of like an endless list and is a whole thing that I'll get into later. So I didn't spend or really bring up any stories or narratives around that. All right, next slide. There's nothing there because, as I told you, I procrastinated and didn't super prepare a really nice presentation, and then decided I maybe shouldn't do that. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen. I didn't realize my face wasn't showing. I'll turn my video on. Hey, I'm here. And I saw someone, now that I've sort of finished that diatribe or that rant, I saw someone ask about the sort of history of that term and language and where it came from. And I wanted to pull up the resources that I had going on to talk about this and to put something together in addition to some other folks who talk about it. So I'm going to reshare. But while I bring those things up, I wanted to say, because I do have a plan to have a Q&A, but more largely driven by Q&A, I would like at any point, anytime, if anybody has any questions, curiosity about this, where's that come from? Okay. If anybody has any questions, comments, concerns about anything that I bring up, feel free to put that in the chat, or you can come off of mute and ask it, and I can address it either immediately, or I will note to put it in somewhere later in the conversation, because I want to speak to everyone else's interpretations, understanding, dealing with the subject primarily, rather than having my own idea of what would be beneficial or useful for you all to hear about this. All right, let's reshare. So the term schoolishness, of course, I got this from Akilah Richards, the Akilah Richards, who has her podcast and website and page and plenty of writings raising free people. She also has this website and has some podcast episodes and other things and clips about this concept of schoolishness. And I will read to you, or we'll read together, what she has listed as the definition for it, and how she defines it. All right, so schoolishness: conventional practices that are rooted in binaries and generally accepted by adults, but rejected by children and teenagers, either overtly or covertly, a living out someone else's goals or narrative of how and what we should be. Schoolishness models an authoritarian approach to adult-child interaction, as well as respectability ideas rooted in adults' innate superiority and knowledge. So that's her brief definition of it. And this is who's here today. Iris Chen has this blog post on her Untigering website about schoolishness and the schoolish mindset, and 4 ways the schoolish mindset hinders the raising of self-driven children. So she mentions lack of trust. And I'll get back to that later, because I have a thing about trust and context. Control being a thing that comes up. Comparison and conformity. So control, comparison, conformity are things that I've definitely mentioned as far as the young people comparing and trying to conform. Parents also want to compare and try to have their children compete with their friends' children or this cousin to show off how much they've learned or what they've done or how far they've progressed in something. Lack of connection is also a sign and thing that stems up, and I've seen that plenty of times. So this is a great piece that Iris has written that I think everybody should check out and dive into, because it really goes into more depth about those particular themes. So I wanted to introduce that to you all. Lastly, there's this video from Akilah about what is schoolishness, which, it's more than her definition. She goes into it a bit at length. I don't want to, because it's on YouTube, it's available for anybody at any point to listen to and play. I don't want to spend time now us collectively listening to it. You can do that on your own time. And I don't want to piggyback on her work or use her work to fluff up, my time with you all. In addition to this YouTube video, she also has an audio clip on this this course that she made for a lot of AOC schools as a part of their parent orientation sessions and stuff. Isn't AOC a great fit for your family? There's a 8-minute audio clip that is a bonus down here called "What is Schoolishness?" A note from Akilah that she includes there, and that's also really good information and content to get from her. Okay, and then back to my notes. That's that. Cool. I'm going to turn the share screen off again so that we can all see each other and talk. This is organized in a not presentable, pretty way, and I decided not to put it in the slideshow. So I will read this stuff off and talk about it, but we can just start a more communal conversation and engage with each other about the subject. And like I said, I'll lead off with some initial realizations or thoughts or ways in which I might itemize or break down this concept. So a question popped in. Oh, she forgot she had written that. Yeah. I mean, ChatGPT. Somebody mentioned the ChatGPT and the AI systems and bots that are existing. There's, I think they're phenomenal. I've used them for research purposes and things, some other writing stuff, and they've been great. And I also, people have been nervous or scared about how now the ChatGPT can do some of this writing and do some other things for the young people, which is cool and fine. But now I think it really just forces any educators or anyone to get more precise and more intentional or purposeful about what they're actually teaching and why they're teaching it, rather than just riding on the tradition of like, oh, this is what schools do. Yeah, we teach them how to write a 5-point essay, and like they go through that, and like we just do that. But if they could have Chat GPT write it for them, then like that's a way for them to do it well, get the A, and move on with life. So now we have to look at, well, why should they or ought they have that skill set? Of what benefit is it to them to know how to write a 5-paragraph essay, or how to create a thesis statement, or how to organize arguments? Like now we have to get into that and break this down and get to learning being more meaningful and purposeful for the young people, rather than just here's the canon academic approach that we have, and we're just doing this every year because this is what we're supposed to. So I think ChatGPT is wonderful. I think if people responded to it well and are right without sort of fear, and really being courageous and engaging with, let's say, the philosophy and the whys behind why we do schooling, I think it's an opportunity for schools to really pivot and for classrooms to become a bit more impactful and enjoyable. So yeah, totally deconstructs productivity, right? You can break the stuff down into, being more purposeful, like I said. All right, so, and this is some of this is in Iris's blog post, some of this is in Akila's stuff, as well, but I would break down and describe how to recognize and realize when schoolishness is popping up in general, and definitely or preferably within yourself as the adult, whether you're a parent or an educator. Pardon me. So at any point when you are facing or dealing with friction or resistance, and you get to a point where, particularly with someone else or a young person, but you get to a point where it seems like it's a battle of wits or a battle of will, or who's going to exert power or more force in the situation, I believe that a lot of those moments, there's now some schoolishness popping up, where you are now relying on or tapping into your power as the authority or as the older person, and you're just trying to make them do something without being able to describe or talk about it in a way that inspires them to maybe not, be cheerleaders about it and full-fledged wanting it and looking for it, but at the very least being willing to try it out, go along with it, get on board with it because they see its importance or relevance or necessity in their lives. But if you can't get to that point, and if you can't have that conversation, and you get to a point where it's like, I'm getting a lot of resistance from this, and we're not talking, and I'm just going to rely on manipulation or force, there's some schoolishness coming about. And the way that ties in is because, at least in my experience, and I think a lot of other people's, the school experience so much relies on not just you as a parent sending your kid off to school, but definitely for that student accepting just the outright authority and the power of authority, or people in authoritative positions, or who have a status or who have a title. So because this is teacher's always right, or we always listen to teacher, or teacher's always going to have the best thing to say, or the guidance counselor, or the principal, or whoever society sets up as the authority figure, we extend their authority and their power or their say-so to more situations than is necessary, and in more ways than it's called for. And we don't see them sometimes as fallible or mistaken people. And they also learn that because they have that status or that title, you need to just listen to or trust their power position. We believe that or take that in for ourselves. And so, of course, expect our young people sometimes to do that. And when we get to the place where I'm the parent, I'm the facilitator, I'm the teacher, I'm the whatever, I have the PhD, I have the master's, or I have the degree, we get into a thing where we just want people to listen to us or trust us just because we are in, the position or the status where people are supposed to just listen because we say so. And so if you have a moment where you're getting resistance or pushback from someone, and you feel yourself tapping into the fact that you have a status or position of authority, or you're the older person, or you're just because you're the parent, and you can't have a conversation with it or have more words about it or answer their questions, it's possibly coming from this internalized sense of schoolishness and just obedience to authority. The next point I would have is recognizing it when something's just like not working and you're like trying it and you you get to a point where like you can't take a break, you feel urgency and it feels dire, it feels like an emergency, even if it's a false sense of urgency, but if you have this sense, or you can say to yourself, this has to happen, or this has to work, or we have to do it this way. It's possibly some schoolishness coming out, because then you're tied into the belief that there's only one way, or there's a particular right way to go about it. And so it has to be this. And you can't take a moment to step back and really assess, do you have to do this? And then, is this actually the only way? Is there some other way, even if it's nonsense or seems counterintuitive, or you have to take a step back to deal with something that seems like it's slowing you down, but actually is completely necessary to moving forward? If you have the sense or feeling that this has to work, I need this this is the only option. If you get urgent and are desperate, it's possibly some schoolishness coming out, because a part of that, at least in the state, I'll clarify, at least in the States, in the traditional sense, and in our conventional schools, there is a narrative that there's a particular way in which you can access social mobility, access capital, and secure social economic status. Is you go to school, you get the grades, you do some networking, you go to a really good college, you go to college period, you get a degree in a profitable field, or you go to a particular school with a name. You have to do this, and this has to be the way it goes. And there's a particular path, and everything else is, if somebody has success on those paths, they're just flukes or statistical anomalies, or they're not realistic or practical for you. Like, is that true? Sometimes based on that, sort of the bias of authority, there's also just this belief that the narrative or the story or the way that we went through it or the way in which we learned is the only way to do it. And so if that's coming up for you, if you feel yourself imposing that on yourself, or especially with young people, then you might want to check and see why you believe that, and if those things are true, and if there might be a different way. And, really just engage in more conversation or dialogue. I find a lot of people have urgency or emergency about certain decisions or tasks that, really aren't that dire. If we really think about it, are you dying of thirst? Are you dying of hunger? Those types of like things that are actually threatening your livelihood are the things you have to do and that are actually emergencies. Other things, yeah, you might miss a deadline, or you might miss the boat at some point, but there's another one coming, or there's another opportunity, or life goes on. Things aren't going to be ruined. And sometimes when we impose that way of thinking on young people, we can also give them a complex and make them anxious about always making the right or most perfect decision, or relying on the path that everybody's going down, instead of being willing to explore it and make mistakes. And this is something I struggle with, this concept of like wasting time, or feeling like, oh, I don't have the time to try this out, or go about some other route, and risking it not going well, or risking 2 years time wasted. There's a whole other reason why I actually think the concept of, I don't have time to waste, or whatever, that's actually a bigger thing. And I think that fear, that concern is valid for some people, but in the context of what we're talking about, a lot of times people use it, have this sense of urgency, and it doesn't really apply. It's not really fit for us. Said that urgency time. If obviously this is a thing, and you'll see this not just in relationships between adult and child, but even in peer relationships or spousal relationships or co-parenting things. If you have the thought or feeling of, I wish they just listen to me, or, oh, I don't have the time or the energy to explain this right now, we can do this later, but we just got to do this right now. Just, could you get on board, or could you not fight me on this? If you have that sense, if you have that feeling, yeah, in that moment you might feel that way and you truly can't explain it. But also that might mean that you've not done the pre-work and laid the foundation on the groundwork where you can avoid that situation and not be there. So if you found yourself just coasting by, and now you're like, oh, just don't fight me, let's just do this, I'm too tired, I can't do this. And definitely with a young person, where they want to have all the conversations, or delay things or put things off because they want to at least understand why, but you're too tired, it's been a work day, or things are urgent or dire, or you really got to get to the next place. Like, can you just do this right now? We could talk about it later. I mean, asking if you could talk about it later or go with it later or in the process is useful and or beneficial for sure. Because sometimes they can or will acquiesce as long as you do that. But also, it's a sign that maybe you did not prepare early enough. In a sense, the story that I was talking about with the students in certain field trips or certain classes, maybe you should have previewed, like expecting them to just go along with things all the time or just in the moment, and just like trust you without any explanation. If they're pushing back on that, and if they're pushing back and you're having that feeling or that thought, it's possible that you haven't been doing the work to warrant that amount of trust and to warrant, like, you haven't been building a relationship where they can do that easily without you actually having to ask or even be frustrated about it. So I'll break off into a little story here where and when running Heartwood, when I was there, we did take some years and really build up processes and a lot of trust and relationship dynamics with the students that we had in the earlier time. And that allowed then, and also leaning into heavily them consenting to stuff and them having ideas or leading the ideation process and coming up with solutions. We built up that relationship, we built up that trust, and we didn't lean on authority or status or just do as I say types of things all the time, which then allow for in the future or just in moments where it really was truly an emergency or dire, or there was just something where we could have stopped and explained, or we didn't need them to like just get along with it. But if there were sparse or spare or rare moments where we wanted to ask for that or could ask for that, we could do it and they could get along with it because we had built up a relationship of trust and a dynamic where they know that we will explain at some point, because we typically do explain ahead of time, or we have a hunch about something and we want them to just try or go along with it. And they know that we've done that previously. And so that's sort of relationship capital that you can't just try to cash in on or get them to go along with if you haven't laid the groundwork. So if you feel that question or that sense coming up and it doesn't, like, they aren't just rocking with it or vibing with it easily or smoothly, then that's a sign that you haven't done the prerequisite work to be able to ask for that from them. So I'm moving to there. This another example is if you're stuck on, and I kind of broached on this earlier, but if you're stuck on protocol or process or a particular strategy or way of doing something, if you find yourself I think we talk about this or concerned about this with like jobs, where we go into an organization or place and we know that, well, this is the way we've always done it, is like a red flag that this place is not the place for us, or it's like that's a sign that they're doing the wrong thing. We also can have that approach as educators, or we can have that approach with ourselves or in facilitating a space where we have these structures in place that help us do certain things. But if we get too loyal to them or too fixated on them or want certain things to manifest in this particular way, that's a sign that you are sort of going down the wrong path, because you're now prioritizing the process of things coming about, or the process or way in which a thing is done, rather than the actual impact or the sort of meta experience that you could have. Testimony and story there. So I don't know how familiar everyone is with Agile Learning Centers and their change-up process, or sort of these democratic meetings where the students are discussing some of the agreements, rules, behaviors for how the school's going to operate, and curating and managing the culture. At Heartwood, we had change-up, we had peer mediation process, and some other sort of ways in which students could bring up issues, complaints, for us to formally talk about them, come up with solutions, come up with ways to deal with it, or to make a purchase or do something with the budget. And I started to get really upset or bothered because students would have these issues or students would have these complaints, but they wouldn't bring them up at the time where we were best as a community oriented to discuss, come up with a solution, deal with it. And so they would not until the very moment where the issue or things happen would they have pushback or be upset or sort of mess up the flow of stuff. It's like, wait, we have these meetings to plan this or to come up with solutions or to talk about this or to solve this problem. And like people aren't using it then, or people are opting out of it, or like, not engaging with it authentically. What's going on? Why aren't people doing it? And yeah, you have this problem, but like now's not the time for us to address it or talk about it. If this is really a big deal or a thing, you need to go to this meeting that we have once a week to discuss it, and you need to remember it and be, in it in the moment. And I used to get really hung up on that because of all the things that I'm balancing and trying to juggle. It's hard to take a moment to hear the student out or deal with this conflict in this particular way when there's some other thing that's supposed to be happening, some other class or some other activity, or I'm focused on some other problem. And by being so fixated on this is the particular way in which we deal with these issues or problems, then I miss out on the opportunity to also communicate to the student that, hey, your problem and stuff is important enough for us to for me to at least stop and pause and give 5 minutes to hearing about it or getting some information about it. And not that we have to solve the problem now, but this does matter to me. This is important. And I care about it now. And I know that I can really dedicate time to it later when we have these structured meetings for talking about it. And I can even remind you to bring it up because it is important to me, and not requiring or relying on you to remember and bring it up and advocate for yourself. So that's a way in which I got so hooked on the proper time, the proper moment for, conflict resolution and cultural management stuff, and did some damage to, their understanding of how important their issues were, in my capacity to like really slow down and stop and show or express and share concern in a way that mattered to them. And this is particularly important when dealing with, or not dealing with, but like working with young people, is that they're young people and they're still learning and developing. And so also still learning and developing ways to understand that people communicate importance and other things in various ways. And so I definitely would see it as my responsibility as a facilitator, as the adult in the dynamic, to be more flexible and fluid and be able to find alternative and additional ways to express that I care. Because if it seems like my concern only comes out in this very formalized, formulaic kind of conflict resolution process, then that can feel cold or robotic, or I've reduced the caring and the solution finding and the community and the connection to a cold robotic process, where almost like a math equation, rather than showing and experiencing and demonstrating some heart and compassion. So that's a way in which being hooked on the protocol or the proper time and place for everything, especially dealing with young people, can really get you caught up and miscommunicate your level of concern. And so this idea of like, there's an appropriate time and place for everything and it's fixed and nothing is movable, nothing is flexible, or yeah, we can adjust things or whatever, but then there's a time to adjust or to talk about it. When you're doing that and it's so rigid, that goes back to like, there's just this one way of doing things, and that's schoolishness kind of popping out. The inability to be flexible and adapt and adjust, and also prioritizing connectivity and emotional intelligence with the young people. Not prioritizing that is teaching them a lesson, implicitly about what's really important, that you do it the right way, that you fill out all the forms in a particular way, or you make sure you follow all the instructions to a T and you capitalize where you're supposed to. It's like, is that really what's important? I'll pause on that rant of the other tribe. I see some comments there where I was saying, okay, share that feeling as well. Yeah, not wanting to sit up through change of meetings, but do want to address it. So one thing about that is because I know, especially with younger students, those change-up meetings, when the issue is not pertinent to them, or they're not a part of the conversation, or when it can spin off into a particular tangent and it's like the same 3 or 4 people talking about it, then the rest of everyone else really gets disengaged from it. And then the longer they're disengaged and bored, now they really don't care, and now they really don't want to sit through it. And if it goes too long or things are belabor the point, that creates a negative experience for them. And then the next one just builds on. It's like, oh, that was a bad change up. Oh, change is kind of boring or long or whatever. So they come into the next one with that expectation, and all they need is for one little instance or moment to reaffirm that, and it becomes a huge trend. And now they never want to use it. They never want to engage with it. And it becomes a thing that they try to avoid. And now you don't even have your process or procedure for addressing it. So it can be being super hung up on the process, because I used to like to, because I know they would get bored and I don't want to take up their entire day with change up and conflict resolution stuff. I like to be like really efficient. Like, let's hit this issue. Let's go through this type procedure. No superfluous conversation and extra comments. let's move on. Let's keep this tight so we can address everybody's thing, get some solution in, get it done within 30. If it's an emergency or like something really big, we're doing it 40 minutes, and then we can go on with our day, so that everybody's willing to come back and continue to engage in it. And me prioritizing that in one end took away from the experience of students being able to voice their concerns or voice things and show that like, hey, this is a concern for me, or this is an issue for me. And like I enjoy sociocracy. I enjoy that process. And sometimes you also have to understand at the meta level, like everybody wants and needs to be heard or feel like they can contribute, but also within certain boundaries. And so being willing and always able to explain or have those conversations with them and checking in on their experience is really important. But yeah, I love the change up process, but I could also get very uptight about its use and its protocol and process sometimes. And that I know that comes from my experience in a more democratic school setting where it's like, how our US government is, where it's all this politicking and legalese and advocating and voting, and there's winners and losers, et cetera. So sometimes I'm having a response reaction to that. Yeah, sometimes those structures don't work for them and there's something else that needs to happen. And I find myself like, while in this moment, in hindsight, it's like, yeah, that's true. So maybe we need to talk about the process, like the change up process is changing up or adjusting other things, but maybe the way in which we go about this needs to be addressed or changed. And I could be so blind to the need to do that, like how we solve conflicts, like having the time to solve conflicts, great. But how we do that and when we do that in that process, that also needs to be flexible too, and fit and go in a way that like works for them. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Oh, cool. I'm catching up with some of the chat because I'm realizing I'm getting very talkative and wordy. Okay, we recently scrapped change up for the in the moment, or as soon as current offerings wrap up emotions smooth. Oh, cool. Okay. So you all are addressing this stuff pretty immediately, and that's working for you all. Yep. The agile tools, I love them. I enjoy them and I love hacking them. And there are just certain ways in which I can get a little too fixated. And it's like I'm learning now in this moment sometimes, and I guess it speaks to schoolishness as well. There's a need to, like, if something's not working, there's some friction, maybe we need to get more meta. Like maybe we need to go up a level and like figure out like, oh, our process for solving problems, there's a problem with our problem solving process. Now we got to discuss that or figure that out, and realizing that like those levels of things, because they're pervasive and underlying everything, you have to like, it took some time to realize how important and necessary and dire that stuff was, because this whole system and way in which we operate is riding on our capacity for communication, problem solving, the way in which we connect. If those fundamental things aren't fixed or addressed, nothing that grows out of it or comes from it is going to work long term or be healthy. So sometimes you got to realize that those bigger, deeper things that like seem minor but are underlying everything, and from which everything is fed on, like you really do need to just stop and halt everything to give that stuff the most importance. Lots of neurospiciness, yeah. That's an interesting word. That's a phrase that you have there. All right, I'm going to get off of that particular soapbox. I know somebody's probably tired of me talking about protocol and my issues with that. Another way to recognize it, or sort of way to address it, is, and this is also in those blog posts and videos and things that I've shared with you from the other authors, Akila and Iris, but asking yourself, wait, whose agenda is this? Like, or what are the goals here? Well, if you find yourself with your young person or even with yourself trying to do something, but then there's some disconnect, or it's not working, or things aren't moving ahead, or you can't manage the energy or the motivation, it might be time to ask yourself, like, whose agenda is this? Like, whose plan is this? Who participated in creating this plan? What is the goal? Whose goal is this? And who does it benefit? Who does it really benefit? Does it benefit people in ways in which they don't even know it's benefiting them? Have I not communicated that to them? Do they even care about those goals? Those are important questions to ask yourself, and to possibly, once you've realized that there's some schoolishness going about, asking yourself that is a great start to like de-weeding and uncoupling some of your own hangups from what's going on in this moment, from what's going on just within you, from some historical stuff and your fears that you might have or biases that you might have. So moving from how to just like recognize it to like kind of ways in which it emerges, and also how to deal with it, or questions to ask yourself. Where's the upset or frustration coming from? Who's actually upset here? Why are they upset or frustrated? What's going on? And obviously now you have to have some conversations with folks. And like, it can be so hard to do that, as I said, with the protocol stuff, because we're living life, we're doing these things, and we don't have time, or we don't have the capacity to like switch into the meta mode all the time in any moment to really adjust, like, wait, what's going on? Why is this happening? Or why are they upset? Or why is this a me thing? Like, oh, that could take some time. You don't know the answer or how long it's going to take to explore that stuff. But then you also have this thing that you really do need to do, and it seems like it's on a time clock. I find that in those moments, schoolishness is popping up. And so you need to ask yourselves, is this actually important? How dire is it? Is it going to be so bad and impossible to like, live or flourish if these things don't get done at the right time or in the right way? Is this actually my goal? Am I imposing this, or trying to get them to internalize something that's a me thing? Why am I so frustrated by it if it doesn't really affect me? Or if I say it doesn't affect me, it's not my thing, but I'm still having an emotional reaction to it. That's a question to ask. Obviously, it emerges if you're dealing with any type, if authority comes into play, right? So whether it's I'm the authority of the school and that I'm responsible and I know more, or I happen to be the person who knows more about the ins and outs of this thing. I'm just the older person, or I'm the experienced person in this place, or I have the title, the degree, or the position, or the role, or the salary hierarchy I'm placed here. Like, whenever you're dealing with authority and people will tap into command or control, or just expecting you to listen to them, that's for sure, if anything, our school system gets you to be compliant with authority just because, and to sort of fall victim to that bias. And so at any moment, if that's at play, if there's a person in the dynamic who explicitly has, more power, or maybe even like implicitly or secretly has it, that could be a time where the schoolishness comes out, where we unwillingly, just like out of habit, step into this authoritarian energy or perspective. Or if we're not the authority, we kind of naturally fall into a compliance, not pushback, not questioning kind of thing, because we just, learn to trust the person in the uniform or with the degree, or who, this is the thing that I struggle with, especially in the States and based on my conventional and sort of elitist education experience. But like, oh, this person's well-spoken, or they have all the words, or they can recite the science, or they've read this book. Oh, this person's very smart. They know what they're talking about. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and believe what they're saying, just because. Like, maybe you shouldn't. So that's the thing. And sometimes you don't know that it's happening, and you kind of just fall into the role because there's certain beliefs that you have about who is the authority and how strong the foundation of the authority or the substance of the authority is or ought to be. Another way it emerges is how we allot time, what we prioritize and give time to, and what we give attention to. So if you find that you give a lot of time and attention, or always willing to stop everything for a work email or work call, or stop everything for, whatever might emerge, it's like, okay, whatever you were doing, the thing that you stopped, maybe now you're communicating to yourself or others that it's not that important to you. It's not that relevant to you. And if we do that for ourselves, we're certainly going to do that for young people, where we step into the room or step into their space where they're at, and just assume that what we have to communicate or what we have for them to do or whatever takes precedent, is more important, and they need to stop what they're doing because it's not nearly as important or relevant as what we have for them. So that's walking into the room, they're playing a video game or reading a book or listening to something, and you just walk in and start talking. You start speaking without seeking their attention, asking for their attention, asking or trying to see if they can give it to you, or waiting for a moment where they can. You just assume that, yeah, like what I have to say and or the things that I want you to do with time are more important than however you want and or plan to do with your time. That's how we can communicate that. And that's also something that we learn in our school experience. Sometimes if it's traditional convention or that, my time isn't as important, or there's certain things about my time that aren't as important as other things. So I had this experience when I started to get back into art and painting. It always felt like it was not a worthwhile pursuit, or there were more important things. Sometimes there might be more important things to do, or engaging in leisurely or restful activities, or, doing things for sport wasn't as important, or I needed to deprioritize it because there's just other things going on or other things in life that I need to figure out, rather than realizing like, no, that's just as important as anything else, or my time is just as important as anyone else's, and valuing and truly saying it almost as a mantra until I really could internalize that. So that's a time where schoolishness can emerge, is when we're trying to decide, or we've already surrendered the decision to allot and determine how we're going to spend our time, or how we're going to impose time restrictions on things on our young people, or managing or directing their capacity for focus, energy, attention, motivation. And we do that for us. However we navigate that, what we give our focus to or energy to or attention, how we try to force it or constrain it or make it happen in a certain way, a certain time, can also be a way in which like, that's that schoolishness coming about, because we are practiced at sitting down when someone's teaching or speaking, whether their session is for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour and a half. I ought to be able to sit here and listen to it and take notes and engage with it fully the entire time without needing a break or without having a moment where I kind of disengage. I was like, is that like, how authentic to you is that? Is that how your brain works? Is that how your body works? Is that how your young person's brain and body work? And then whether or not we can control it, like we just all go through these different cycles and things happen. So yeah, there's a moment to exercise some restraint or self-control, or kind of challenge ourselves to push beyond comfort levels. And there's a time where maybe we need to listen to our bodies, listen to our stomachs, listen to just our emotions, and understand like, you know what, I'm just not in a space right now where I can focus. I've tried and I can't do it, or I don't have the energy for this type of activity and I could push myself through it, but it's going to wear me out in ways that's going to take much longer to repair or recover from. Or yeah, I'm trying to listen to this interview or trying to listen to this podcast or read this book, but my mind's elsewhere and I can't force the attention right now. And maybe you don't have to, maybe you don't need to. Like it might be fine to take a break and come back to it when it best suits you or best fits you. Or maybe you just have to accept it, like, and also you might miss out on a particular thing or activity or time slot or due date because the way you're working and how your energy is flowing is not in sync with what is going on for something else. And that's not inherently a problem. That's not inherently a mistake or fault in you as a person or your young person. It's not even necessarily an inherent flaw or mistake in the system or the institution and how it's working. That's just kind of, life. Everybody's working through these different flows and different cycles. And so that's a time where it can emerge, where you're trying to direct yourself, basically use some executive functioning in ways that are really draining you. And obviously for our young people as well. This is sort of a tangent of that, but I'll add it here with like matters of bodily autonomy or physical comfort. That's a way, sometimes that's where schoolishness emerges, because as we know, schools or conventional schools are getting a little bit less human and requiring younger and younger people to do things that their bodies and minds, for lack of a better word, are not designed or did not evolve to do. So, sitting still at a tight desk up, I've seen schools that like, not just sitting still at a desk, but you have to sit upright and have your hands in a certain position for extended periods of time, and your eyes have to be in a certain direction. It's like, that's not appropriate for a third grader. Like, no, I don't want to do that as an adult. I know the young people don't want to do that, and to some degree, they can't do it. Like developmentally, that's ridiculous. And so, anytime you're having to ignore or push aside your physical comfort or what's okay for your body because it seems there's something else that you have to do or that's more appropriate, that's for sure a time where your schoolishness is going to pop out. Either you're imposing it on yourself or imposing it on someone else or your expectations when you're a young person, forcing them to do something that does not make sense for, and doesn't align with the history of humanity and how we've evolved and how we've learned or how we operate in society. So that's another way in which it emerges. I'm realizing that I just been talking so long and have barely taken any live questions, and I guess nothing's there in the chat, but I do want to take a breather and take a point to really open it up for anybody to contribute or ask anything. So I'll get through this other stuff really quickly. Schoolishness, if you've had a traditional or conventional school setting, or if you're with people who have had that, any learning environment that you're in, any transference of information, schoolishness is definitely going to pop up. It's going to happen, whether it's a school, university, library, first aid certification course, online webinar or conference series. It's going to pop out for sure, because if not you leaning into some habits, then your presenter or then the other participants in the event who are going to impose certain norms and expectations. So that's the time to always be vigilant. Obviously, schoolishness is going to come out in any dynamic where an adult or an elder is relating to or dealing with a child or just a younger person, for sure. When you're looking at results or trying to measure or test and see if something's effective or useful or worth your while, you got to be careful that your metrics are not schoolish metrics that are not true to what's actually important to you. I addressed on the matters of urgency, planning and strategizing. Schoolishness can pop out a lot there, because when you're a young person and you're in school, you start from first grade to 12th grade, you know what your life is basically going to be like and what that's going to look like for that extended period of time. And so I find, and even if you go to college or grad school, these 3-5+ year plans or things that you're just kind of locked down to, any type of 3+ year planning or detailed strategizing for your life or your business or whatever, there's some schoolishness there, because there's a myth of how much we can plan, control, or dictate, and we don't give enough credit or room for the unpredictable things in life, and just our changing and or fleeting emotions, values, perspectives, or how the people around us, our support, our community can evolve and change as well. But in a standardized setting like your conventional public school, where for the most part what the school day is going to look like, and it's the same each year, every day, each year for the next 12 years or more, when that's such a unique and specific isolated experience that is also very new in the history of humanity, and thinking of life that way is might not be the best thing for you, because outside of the school setting, for sure, there's a lot more at play that can change, and it's outside of not just your control, but outside of any authoritative or institutional control. So that's also a moment where schoolishness is going to emerge, and you ought to be on the lookout. Yeah, so I'll pause there, I'll stop there with my ranting and raving and long-winded stories to give more time and wind for anybody to say if something resonated with them, or if they have a question, or if they have a testimony to share about this, or they are looking for solutions or something, anything. Wanted to provide time for somebody to share that, whether it's in the chat or you can come off mute and say it. Rebecca's saying in the chat about struggling with perfectionism and doing things the right or certain way. Yeah. And it can get in the way of self-care, your relationships. Yeah. That rigidity, that sort of dogmatic or religious fixation on protocol and procedures and certain rituals and getting a very specific result is schoolishness, because that is a way of thinking, at least in the school setting, that is valued, mainline. It's how everything is approached, and is somewhat contrived. Let's see. Anybody here have a testimony, a share, something that resonated with them, a question that they want to pop out there? Go ahead.
Hi, Anthony. This is Iris. I have a question.
Yeah.
So yeah, like what would you recommend for us as the adults, usually in the relationship, when we notice schoolishness arising? Just
When
to
you
be
notice it,
aware, or
so being when you can notice it in the time that like in the moment that it's happening or like shortly thereafter, rather than like sometimes for me, I might reflect on it 2 weeks later and realize it was happening. But if you can notice it in the moment, I think a really important thing is to like pause and almost like completely disengage from the matter at hand for a minute or two so you can at least put some questions into sort of probe some questions for yourself, put them out into your subconscious for you to start processing and thinking about, and to see either what comes up immediately or might come up as you think about it more in the future. But I think disengaging from the more immediate thing for at least a couple minutes to go through a question list to sort of prime the pump is really important. Because if you're in the moment and you try to force it or push it, even if you're aware of it, it's hard to like, oh, I'm being kind of schoolish. Okay, let me not do that, or let me try to back off, or let me keep going with it, but like make it less than. It was like maybe if you're skilled at, if you can manage that, that could work or be helpful. But I think it's better to like step away from it completely for the moment, so that you can really ask yourself important questions.
yeah, thank you. And I think maybe that points to what you were saying about the urgency that we feel too. Like sometimes we feel like we just need to like respond and deal with it in the moment, but
Yeah.
to have the space to reflect and not react, I think is part of the work. Thank you.
And to that point, hearing you say that immediately made me think of, the issue with where some schools might do testing or quizzes. Is like, here's the moment. This is the only moment. Here's the question. You have to answer this question right now in this moment the right way for all time. And it matters. This is the only time you can get this point. And so it's like we go through life continuously creating these like, exams and tests for ourselves where we have to have the right answer or the best answer in this moment. It's like, not actually. Like you can come back and edit your response or your reaction, or you can have some time to deliberate and answer when it best suits you. It's just not, you don't have to have the right answer right away. You can take some time to figure it out, and you also don't even have to have the right answer. It could just be the best answer or the best solution you can come up with at the time. And you can always make amends or repair or double back on things. And that's going to be super important, especially with young people, where you can have a moment where you can acknowledge and speak to a mistake that you made and reflect with them and apologize and, then come up with some better solutions and things together. And that's teaching them that like, yeah, like mistakes happen. Like I don't need to make perfection or rightness, my aim. That's not really the important skill. The capacity really is like to try stuff out, but also learn from it, and to, try it again and get better. I think that probably leads to having a great, what's the term, a growth mindset. So Emily asked here, during a group meeting like set the week, how do you keep schoolishness from taking over in the interest of being productive? That is a continuous like balancing act, and you really have to wear all these hats and juggle all these things, because yeah, you want to get through the stuff and you want everybody's thing to be heard, and in order to do that you have to be a bit more efficient and not go into every little tangent or rant, and so you don't want to then lean into the same authoritative or like rigid practices that are there in schoolishness. So continuously balancing and judging, is this a time to be more flexible? I think in the moment when you're doing it is a hard time to like make the decision or to know how to make a decision. I think for me at least, having relationships with those young people and being in connection with them and knowing them for some time, that I would tend to rely on and could lean on to know, all right, this person has something to say, and like I know maybe or can suspect that like, oh, they're going to go down this avenue or this tangent because I know them, or I know how they are, or I can cut them off because I understand what they're saying. and it's not relevant, or we can readdress it, or we can come back to it, etc. And so sometimes, like I said before, like the moment in that moment is sometimes the wrong time to really be dealing with certain issues. Sometimes it's the work that you do up into that allows you to make a better decision. But I think it's a continuous balancing act. I think it's a science and an art. So it's never going to be perfect, or it's never going to be right, and you're always going to need to improve or change based on the students that you have, how many of them, how old they are, how long you've been with them, and how their understanding or buy-in. Heck, the time of day that you're having the meeting, the weather outside, all of that's going to come into play. So you really do have to hold a lot of things together and try to come out with and sort of calculate that equation as best you can. While doing that, I think narrating and explaining those things and justifying that stuff to the young people, even if they disagree, they don't like it, or they still object or whatever, just the capacity to explain it and share the decision that you're making, why you're making it based on what observations or judgments or whatever, can go a long way, because they know, again, you're building that trust, you're building the relationship of like, all right, they kind of lean into this thing, or they're doing this and this feels off, and I don't like it, and I wish they had done something different, but I can at least understand their rationale. I can at least understand or get or know that there's a reason for it, and that this person isn't being a rigid, unmoving, unwavering, uncompromising, authoritative figure in this moment. Like, they're trying to do the best that they can in serving the interest of everybody and holding a lot of things at once. And I think narrating or communicating some of that, either in that moment, beforehand, afterwards, or at some point, is going to go a long way in being able to make mistakes and learn from failure in a more graceful way. Something to think about is the schoolishness of working relationships between adults, parents, and facilitators, facilitator alike. How do we de-school, decolonize those relationships? Oh, that's a great question. And I would love for you, I'll read the rest of it before I move on. Also, there's some schoolishness required when being a facilitator, right? Like the planning ahead, thinking of the logistics, managing time, etc. And yet at the same time, being able to be agile and in the flow. And I think there's a give and take there. Yes, especially when facilitators aren't on the same page at the same time. That balancing act and continuously flowing and stuff. And like, when you're on, I like to say, it's like the show when you're on stage, this is the show, this is the performance. When you're actively facilitating, there's some things that you can flow and navigate and improv in the moment. And also behind the scenes, off stage, when the show's not happening, being able to talk about not just planning for the next show, but talking about and coming up with some agreements or understanding about how you navigate improvisation and things like, because you're not going to stick to the script all the time. And there's certain ways in which you have to change. Being in relationship and connecting and knowing this is how this person kind of prefers to change, or this is their dynamic, or that person learns some of my things and can understand when I'm pivoting or changing in the moment and can sort of respond or react more appropriately. Or we can just get a shared language and a shared understanding of how we improvise and do things differently in the moment when we can't, sit down and have a strategic conversation while the show is happening, while we're on stage. I think that after that meta level stuff and talking about how you're going to approach changes or difficulties or new things in the moment when you can't really take a super long amount of time is going to be really important. Laying the groundwork for that is important. Back to your specific part about working relationships and schoolishness there. That is interesting. And I would love to hear you describe more, talk about more like how you're defining what you mean when you talk about schoolishness of working relationships.
Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit. I can speak to first like parent facilitator relationships. Right. There could be that feeling for parents of like, I'm dropping my kid off to this authority figure, right? There's some of that, right? There's some of that happens. There's some also the flip side of like, I'm the parent, these are my expectations for my child in this space. And so I'm hoping that you fulfill these expectations. There's that type of schoolishness that happens. And then the working relationships, right? Like there's like in society, we start learning it in school, right? Of like certain types of relationships in certain types of places. You only show parts of yourself in different spaces. And then as facilitators, if you're co-facilitating in a space, I think we come with that schoolishness of like, okay, I'm a facilitator here. This is my role. This is your role. So we're only going to share those parts of ourselves in some ways. But that doesn't serve, to me at least, like that doesn't serve this purpose of being a self-directed community together.
Yeah, I understand.
But
that
it's hard to break these schoolishness things when it's not just yourself. Now it's not just a self-reflective process. It's a process where I need to now be in dialogue, be in community, be connecting, so we can break down the schoolishness together. I think that's kind of what I'm talking about.
So the parent part is simple but not easy. And I would say, and I got some of this this language or this way of thinking from Nancy at Mosaic LC. She does this thing where they do, I think she would call it like unmarketing, kind of sort of, or like advertising almost against themselves in the school. And I know Antonio at Abram does this. But basically, outright, as a part of our orientations and info sessions, we would say, like, this is a parent participation kind of school. Like, this is not the type of school where you drop off your kid and they have their experience and that's it, and they listen to it. Like, we're not that place. We are the type of school, we're the type of community where the parents need to be engaged. This school will not exist if parents aren't engaged, participating, showing up in the space, helping out, asking questions. Like, this is not a thing where parents are isolated on the outside at all. Like, you have to participate. If you aren't participating or involved, this doesn't work. And so that immediately communicates that, yeah, we have to be this is a community. We have to be in relationship. We have to be in dialogue. The parents actually sign an agreement when they enroll and at the beginning of each year that, like, they agree to participate. They agree to come to meetings and conversations or to speak up and address things or say things if it's bothering them. Like, they have an explicit duty and responsibility to also be participants and to not offload to offload all of the work or whatever onto the facilitators or the teachers or the students in the school as a whole body. And putting that out there explicitly upfront, and also setting the precedent and doing things, not just saying it, but following it up and making sure that there are opportunities and avenues for them to do that and practice it, has been hugely beneficial and what has helped Hartwood be a place where parents are participating, involved, and aren't just dropping their kids off and developing, more personal and like friendly relationships and connections with the facilitators outside of just outside the commonality of their student or the kid and what's going on with them. So that's one way. And then having, just for the adults, facilitators and parents and any other staff, like having a moment for them to interact and do things together socially or casually that is explicitly and intentionally not about the kids, because this is something definitely I would always do. Is like make conversations actually about the child or pivot. Like, there would be moments where, like, hey, we're getting together to do this thing, we're either at a restaurant or karaoke or a game night. Not only are the kids, not allowed present, like physically have to be somewhere else, so it can't come to the thing. Nobody is allowed to bring them up or anything going on with them. And nobody's allowed to bring up anything about the school because, I'm not just a facilitator. I'm not just a parent. Like, there are more things going on for me in my mind about my life. I have other interests than just my student or my child and their school experience and what they're doing. Like, so I think that's a very important thing to do and to encourage and sort of build for your community culture. I know we're running out of time. And the other thing between adults and facilitators, a challenge for me, and there's a whole probably video essay behind like why this is a challenge for me and the struggle I have with doing this, but it became a challenge for me to start to take off some of those layers and to be a whole full person at school as a facilitator with the kids. It's important that they not just see, because if we're talking about community and SDE and this is supposed to be a holistic thing, I need to model being a whole human in front of them and making mistakes and fessing up to the mistakes and having different emotions, being angry, being super excited and giddy, sharing that I'm very interested in the thing, or sharing that I'm repulsed by a thing, sharing that like some days I'm not feeling it, my energy is low and I need to cancel all the offerings that I scheduled for the day, going to semi-nap in the hammock outside, or being Like I need to also show up as a full human, because it's not like a conventional school where I'm the teacher, I'm just here to teach you science or teach you these basic subjects and that's it. And there's this air or approach of professionalism and keeping it isolated. No, we're a different type of place. We're a community, we're a school. I'm a facilitator. I'm modeling, I'm managing, facilitating, leading this community, serving this community. I also need to model for these young people like the full experience of being a human, because as the AOC is saying, like, learning from culture, not just content, you learn from your teachers that you show up to a job and you're professional or you're stale, or there's certain aspects of your life that you suppress or that you don't bring up. So it's like, okay, this is hard for me, this is challenging, and I'm going to, we got 60 seconds. I'm going to bring up and be a full person, a full flawed person who shows up in all the ways and talks about it. And I think that's important. And I think that's what you do for the young people. And I think you do that as an adult and have your interactions with the other adults somewhat in public in front of the young people, so that they can also see, like, yeah, these are two adults who are working together, and it's hard, it's difficult, and there's friction, and like, oh, there's like some miscommunication here. They're kind of upset. Like, you don't have to hide that from them. Now, you don't need to do the full thing. You can table it and pencil it for later. But I think it's perfectly healthy and fine for them to see that and learn how to navigate that in a more human way. Yeah, I'm hopefully this was beneficial for everyone. 13 seconds left. I hope folks got out of it. I'm sorry we ran out of time, but I hear that's actually a good thing when people are wanting more. So, yeah.